Who went to a liberal art university? Did anybody ever tell you why it was a liberal art university? Did you have Liberal Arts 101 where they sat you down and said, here's why we're called a liberal arts university? Those are loaded words. There's a history to those terms, and here's what it is. They didn't do that, right? It's just, that's what it's called. It's just named that. It's a liberal arts university. There are 7 liberal arts. These didn't come down on some tablet from heaven saying there could only be 7. This is just a human convention over, I think it took about 1,000 years from when they started being talked about formally, like in Plato and Aristotle's day, to when you finally get to Boethius and Quintilian, guys around 500 AD. You got about 1,000 years where the 7 liberal arts are just sort of fluid, squishy. Some people wanted 9. They thought medicine and architecture should have been included. It didn't make the cut. Just like so stuck down with 7. But it just developed over time. It's a convention. And all these arts, these are not biblical categories where you have to defend grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, tooth and nail, punch your neighbor if they don't get it right. These are just conventions that help us organize education. But over that 1,000 years, they did narrow down what education looks like to 7 liberal arts. And I'll go ahead and put them up here so we can think about them. We did grammar, and then dialectic and rhetoric will be part of our 3 days. And these 3 arts together have a name, inclusively called the trivium. Tri, like tricycle, triangle, tricentennial. Is that a word? Tricentennial. 3, right? So it's got 3 of something, and then handy dandy grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. Vium is from the Latin word via for road or way. So 3 ways or 3 roads. And these are specifically language arts. So when you took language arts, and I remember my 3rd grade English book was language arts. These are the language arts. So the structure of language, the structure of inquiry, or the art of inquiry for dialectic, and then the art of expression, presentation, persuasion, decision making. Once again, these don't have a Bible verse that go with them. There's just different ways to define. But we got those 3, and they're the 3 language arts, specifically focused on words and how to use them to discover and convey truth. Or lies, depending on how you're using it. And then there's another batch. The other 4 are known as the quadrivium. Quad, it's all pretty clear there, right? Quadrivium. And then those are, in a list, arithmetic, geometry, harmonics, and astronomy. And because of the way the classical education renewal in America has panned out, we focus more on the trivium than on the quadrivium. But that's not to say that they're not the skeleton in a closet somewhere or the black sheep of the family. It's just the way this is all fell out. We talk more about the trivium than the quadrivium. But I want to introduce you to the quadrivium for just a minute or 20. So that we do have a bigger picture coming into this as we narrow down. So once again, we want to start broad and then hone it in there so we're not maybe missing some things along the way. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time and give a history of the quadrivium as a part of the 7 liberal arts. So we'll move through them, some more quickly than others. Arithmetic is just that. It's the study of number as number. 2 + 2 = 4 is true for 2 of whatever you got plus 2 of whatever else you got. There's 4 of that altogether. Geometry is going to be when number extends into space. So these are all number arts. So you have language arts for trivium and number arts for quadrivium. So these are relationships of number to how humans use them and learn them. If arithmetic is just number as number or number as such, geometry would be number in space. Harmonics, like why did that make the cut? So the reason these 4 is because of how far back they go historically when men started categorizing them. And so you go back to Pythagoras. So you've got in geometry or in trigonometry and geometry, you got the Pythagorean theorem so that you can find the length of that hypotenuse on a right triangle. Well, this Pythagoras guy wasn't just into geometry, he was into anything that had to do with number. Math was divine to Pythagoras. Math was divine. I don't know that you can say math was a god, because I don't think he'd put a personal aspect to it, but he probably would say math is divine. It's overarching for everything. And so Pythagoras wants to learn all he can about number. So he wants to think about it abstractly. He wants to think about it when you measure lines and triangles and stuff. But then he also was thinking about it with proportions and ratios, relationships of things that could be measured up against one another. And one of the cool things that he decided to do, and I don't know why, but it related directly to music, measuring sounds so that you could better understand music. So they would stretch the strings out and get them taut, and then put your finger on it at halfway and pluck it on both sides and be like, oh, it's the same note. An octave higher, right? But it's the same tone. And then they do it at 2/3 and 1/3, and they pluck on either side. And they listen for the relationship of those sounds. And then they do it at 4/5 and 1/5. So they did all these different proportions of the string in relationship to what was left over. And they wrote it all down, and they categorized harmonics. And because Plato was Pythagorean in a lot of his understanding, and Plato got to be so pivotal for Western culture, harmonics continued to be studied, right? This is just history working itself out. And so they studied harmonics, or harmony. And it's interesting because even back when they were just studying music, Plato made the relationship between musical harmony and social harmony. So he even talked about how giving our young ones good music as early as we can, that it actually goes into structuring their reason and their soul. One interpretation I've heard of why astronomy is in this list is that it precedes all of the other sciences. So if you have arithmetic, number as such, geometry, number in space, harmonics, number in time, right, because we're measuring frequencies for harmonies. Astronomy is number in time and space. And I think it's cool because on the practical level, before we abstract and start being all philosophical again, just on the practical level, astronomy allows you to keep time. Even more than that, navigation on ships, right, where they would use the stars, or even early surveyors in America would recalibrate their instruments every night when the stars came out, because they didn't have GPS to check if they were right, and so they'd check up in the sky at night, and then they'd adjust back up to their line in the daytime. So it's about space, right? It's about keeping you, it's about time and space. Time, what month you're in, space, where you are on the globe, based on the North Star and where all the constellations are. So that's just practical, right? Time and space. That makes sense. A kind of cool part about it, that maybe a little more abstract, but this goes back to modern skepticism too, and how astronomy helps keep you and your students out of that, is that at about, I think it was 585 BC, 600 years before Christ, a guy named Thales predicted a solar eclipse. So up until, and has anybody seen a full solar eclipse? I haven't. We get to next year, August 21st, 2017. We're in the path. Not a lot of population in the path, and we're in the path to see a full solar eclipse. I've heard it's freaky. Yes. That it's about as dark as midnight, except that the darkness is glowing. Up in the sky, the corona, you can see all this stuff waving around the sun. And so for a long, long time, when people would look up and the sun would disappear and have this freaky glow, people just assumed the gods were angry. And from what I've heard about looking at it, you should assume that if you don't know better. It's like, whatever's going on, this can't be good. This can't be good. So without any more information than that, the gods were angry, people freaking out, cutting themselves, not knowing what to do. Thales comes along and says, on such and such a day of the calendar, 585 BC, there will be a solar eclipse. And then it happens. So either Thales is a god, or these aren't arbitrary motions of the gods. And so in the history of Western philosophy, many, many, many academics place the beginning of Western philosophy at 585 BC when Thales predicted a solar eclipse. Like, that's astronomy, that's not philosophy. It changed everything. Some man predicted what we thought the gods did. It's huge. And so the beginning of Western thought is clocked from right there in 585 BC. So the cool thing about astronomy, especially against skepticism and doubt, and you can't know anything, is that Thales predicted that solar eclipse, and we can predict them, we can predict even a whole lot more, even more concretely now, right? We can send the Voyager 1 out in space so that it'll catch Jupiter's orbit, which will fling it over toward Saturn, so that it'll fling it over toward, It's amazing. That's all planned. How can you send that thing up there and know that it's going to hit that? I don't know. But they know. The NASA guys know, and they do it. I don't know how they do it. Where is room for human knowledge to be entirely skeptical in a world where where Jupiter and Saturn are so predictable that we can fling something out in space and we can predict that it's going to spin it around and shoot over there? Before there were any satellites, you could measure the heavens, right? You could predict the heavens, but you couldn't manipulate them. Like biology, the frog's on the table, right? The frog is right there in front of you. You're manipulating it. Chemistry, you're mixing it all together to see what happens. Physics, you put the block on the inclined plane, you pull the rope on the pulley. It's all right here. That's why those are natural sciences. It's all manipulatable. But astronomy's not. You can't reach it. It's too far. Even if you could reach it, you can't manipulate it. You can't shift Jupiter to make it. It's like, let's see what happens when we move Jupiter. That's not a test. That's not a hypothesis that we can actually find a conclusion for. And so astronomy is a liberal art because it frees man from the bondage of ignorance. Or it frees man especially from somebody else saying you can't know. And it actually establishes deep down the understanding that, yeah, I can know stuff that I can't reach, that I can't touch, I can't manipulate it. And so all of these, the 7 liberal arts, why are they called liberal? From the Latin liber, where we get liberty. It's from the same root. So it's freeing that for a student, for a person, however old, for a student however old, to acquire a capacity to use the 7 liberal arts to acquire truth, to seek and to acquire truth. And it's through the 7 that particularly spread out into all of the others. That's why the seven were rudimentary, and then other ones came later. So it's not denying the other natural sciences. It's just saying that these are a little bit more foundational in the pursuit of being a free human being. And we want our children, right? What do we want to be? What do we want our children to grow up to be? We want them to be free, whether they're under a tyrant or whether they're under a good president. We still want them to not be bound by what everybody else is thinking and by what everybody else is saying. So the 7 liberal arts free you from propaganda.